The studio lights were hot, but not as heated as what was about to unfold. The set of Truth versus Power was already buzzing, not from applause, but tension. Denzel Washington sat poised at one end of the panel, dressed in a dark tailored suit, eyes sharp, jaw set. On the opposite side sat Scott Bessent, billionaire hedge fund titan, relaxed, almost too relaxed, sipping sparkling water like this was a fireside chat instead of a televised reckoning. The host barely had time to finish her opening remarks before Denzel leaned in, voice low but slicing. "You profit while we starve, Scott. And you do it with a smile." The air left the room. Even the camera operators froze. Bessent blinked, caught off guard. He tried to chuckle, big mistake. "Now wait a second, Denzel. I've created jobs." Denzel cut him off. "You've created numbers on spreadsheets. You manipulate debt like it's a game. Meanwhile, real families, black families, working-class families, lose their homes while you place bets on misery. And you're invited on this show to speak as if you've earned some moral high ground?" The audience murmured, a slow boil of claps and gasps. Scott adjusted his tie, visibly rattled. "I'm not the enemy here," he replied, voice tight. "Capitalism isn't the problem." "No," Denzel shot back, "unchecked greed is." There it was. The moment. The lightning strike. A truth so raw it didn't need volume, just clarity. The host tried to pivot, but Denzel leaned forward again, this time addressing the viewers directly. "You're watching this from your couch, maybe with 2 jobs, maybe trying to pay rent that's doubled in 5 years. And this man wants you to believe he's a hero for making billions while you hustle to survive." Bessent's face turned a shade paler. He wasn't used to being confronted, not like this. "I don't need to defend success," he muttered. "No one's attacking success," Denzel said. "We're calling out exploitation dressed up as achievement." The camera zoomed in. Denzel's expression was stone cold, measured, and absolutely unshakable. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a takedown. And it had only just begun. Scott Bessent shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable now. The controlled confidence he walked in with had cracked. But he tried to salvage it, his voice steadying as he leaned into the mic. "Denzel, you're making it personal. But the truth is, without people like me, the economy doesn't move. Capital has to circulate. Risk is necessary. Innovation is born from volatility." Denzel didn't even blink. He let Scott speak, but the moment the billionaire tried to wrap it in economic theory, Denzel leaned forward again. "You just described chaos like it's progress," he said sharply. "You gamble with lives and call it innovation. You inflate housing markets, profit off interest spikes, and when the collapse comes, you walk away richer. The people left holding the bag? They're the same ones you never meet." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. Scott smiled nervously, holding up his hands. "You think I don't care?" Denzel shook his head. "No. I think you've confused profit with purpose." He turned again to the camera, breaking the fourth wall like a veteran actor who had mastered both performance and truth. "Millions of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Single moms working double shifts. Students drowning in debt. You've never stood in a food pantry line, Scott. You've never had to choose between insulin and rent." Bessent opened his mouth, but Denzel was relentless now. "You look down on the people whose labor makes your wealth possible. And you sell this illusion that you're helping the economy while they can't afford eggs." A pause. And then, in a voice that cracked just enough to feel human. "What you don't get, is that people aren't angry because you're rich. They're angry because you pretend their suffering is necessary for your success." Scott looked down for a moment. Just a second. A flicker of realization? Or embarrassment? The host tried again to regain control. Gentlemen, let's stay on topic. Denzel interrupted without apology. This is the topic. The camera caught the audience, silent now, leaning forward, hooked. They invited me here to talk politics. But this isn't politics. It's survival. And with that, Denzel sat back, his eyes still locked on Scott. One round was over. But the bell hadn't rung yet. Scott adjusted his cuffs and gave a tight-lipped smile, but anyone watching could see it, he was bleeding confidence. Still, he leaned into his old playbook, control the narrative. You know what this sounds like, Denzel, he said, his voice lower, sharper. It sounds like resentment disguised as virtue. You criticize the system, but you thrive in it. You've won awards, made millions, off the same capitalism you now denounce. Denzel slowly nodded, like he was waiting for that exact line. There it is, he said. The classic deflection. If I succeed, I must be complicit. If I speak up, I must be ungrateful. You want me to cash checks and stay quiet. The studio murmured. I don't owe silence to a system just because I survived it, Denzel continued. In fact, surviving it is exactly why I speak. Scott chuckled dismissively. You act like the system is rigged against everyone. But America is still the land of opportunity. You just have to work hard. Denzel sat up, eyes locked, no smile. I worked hard, Scott. But so did my mother, and she had to clean houses just to afford groceries. So did my neighbor who got laid off after 20 years because some hedge fund decided labor was a line item. He leaned forward. You say opportunity, but forget to mention it's gated. The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Scott tried to wave it off. Oh, come on. You're romanticizing struggle. Life isn't fair. You can't expect equity of outcome. Denzel's voice dropped low, almost a whisper, but every word was crisp. We're not asking for equity of outcome. We're asking for fairness of access. We're asking for systems that don't crush people before they even get a shot. He turned to the camera again. Because here's the truth, if America was truly fair, we wouldn't need scholarships for black kids just to get into rooms they should have already had keys to. Gasps. The host's eyes widened. But Denzel wasn't done. The people watching this at home, they feel this in their bones. They don't need economic models. They need leaders who see them. Scott leaned back, jaw tight. Denzel leaned in. And right now? You're not seeing a damn thing. Scott Bessent folded his hands and gave a smug tilt of the head, signaling he was done being polite. You're good, Denzel. You talk like a preacher, deliver like a playwright. But you're also dangerously naive. Systems aren't built on feelings, they're built on numbers, outcomes, data. You can't run a country on grievances. Denzel didn't flinch. Grievances, he echoed. You think people demanding dignity are just venting? Scott nodded, arms crossed. We don't need more emotion. We need solutions. Not actors giving monologues. That hit drew a few chuckles from the studio. But Denzel leaned forward, eyes burning. You think this is a monologue? No, Scott. This is a mirror. And you're mad at the reflection. Gasps. Someone in the audience audibly whispered, damn. Let me be clear, Denzel said. You want data? Let's go there. The average black family holds about 1/10 the wealth of the average white family in this country. 1/10. Scott rolled his eyes, muttering, here we go. Black homeowners are denied loans at double the rate, even when their income and credit scores match. Black mothers are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. And black men? We don't have to do anything to be seen as a threat. Scott tried to cut in, that's a selective reading, but Denzel didn't let up. Selective? Brother, this ain't cherry-picking. This is lived reality. He stood, just slightly, towering over the table. You can cite GDP all you want, but you don't live with what that growth costs. You don't hear the doors that never open. You don't bury the dreams choked out by 1,000 polite denials. Scott leaned back, now clearly uncomfortable. You sound angry, he said. Denzel smiled, tight, sharp, knowing. I am angry. And I earned every inch of it. He turned to the audience. But don't mistake anger for weakness. Sometimes it's the only honest thing in the room. Silence. Then a wave of applause, stronger than before. The audience wasn't watching a debate, they were witnessing a reckoning. And Scott? He looked, for the first time, like a man who realized the ground beneath him was shifting. Scott straightened his blazer, forcing a smile. Denzel, I hear your passion. And I don't dismiss your facts. But passion without pragmatism leads to chaos. I'm not your enemy. I'm a realist. He gestured to the audience with a practiced flair. I built an empire on strategy, not sentiment. If we want real reform, we need market-based solutions. Incentives. Structure. You can't guilt America into greatness. Denzel gave a slow nod, arms crossed, eyes locked. You just said the quiet part out loud, Scott. You think equity is charity. You think justice is a branding issue. The audience murmured. A few leaned forward, sensing something was coming. You talk about building empires, Denzel continued. Empires built on exploited labor. On redlined neighborhoods. On privatized prisons. You want to talk incentives? Let's talk about who gets rewarded for pain. Scott interjected sharply. That's inflammatory. But Denzel raised a single finger, calm but commanding. No. What's inflammatory is that entire communities have been priced out of the future while your hedge fund friends gamble with the present. Scott turned defensive. I've donated millions. And that's the problem, Denzel shot back. You think justice can be written off like a tax deduction. Applause broke out again, raw, electric. You want to be seen as a reformer? Denzel said. Then stop playing savior and start listening like a citizen. Because these systems you call pragmatic, they're designed to keep the same people winning. Scott attempted to reclaim control, voice hardening. I'm not ashamed of success. And I'm not ashamed of rage, Denzel fired back. I'd just rather mine build bridges than bankroll yachts. The room erupted. A producer signaled for a break. Cameras zoomed in. The network knew they had lightning in a bottle. But Denzel wasn't performing. He was testifying. A red light blinked. We've got a caller, the host announced. Line 3. Go ahead. A voice came through the speaker, shaky but sharp. My name is Jerome. I'm 62. I spent 30 years teaching in inner-city Detroit. I've buried more students than I've congratulated. I just want to ask, how do you both sleep at night? One of you profits off broken systems. The other gives speeches. But nothing changes. The room froze. Even the producers hesitated. Denzel leaned toward the mic, his tone suddenly lower, more personal. Jerome, first, thank you. For holding on. For not giving up even when the country gave up on you. He exhaled slowly. You're right. Speeches aren't enough. Not anymore. I don't want applause. I want accountability. You buried students, I've stood at the same funerals. I've seen promise erased by poverty. Denzel glanced at Scott, then back to the camera. And I've also seen men in $3,000 suits talking about market solutions while sipping cocktails made in buildings those kids will never enter. Scott stiffened. I didn't come here to be vilified. You came here to be seen, Denzel said. But people like Jerome? They've been invisible for decades. The host tried to shift the energy, but the caller's voice came back in, softer this time. Then say their names. Not just the ones who make the headlines. The ones we forget. Say them. Denzel nodded. Javon Mitchell. Age 15. Shot walking home. Kiara Brooks. Age 9. Asthma attack. Closest ER was 40 minutes away. Marcus Bell. Age 17. Wrong place. Wrong time. No justice. The audience was silent. Some wiped tears. Scott looked away. For the first time, he had no numbers, no models. Just silence. That's how I sleep, Jerome, Denzel finished. By not forgetting. The red light turned off. The moment stayed. And the show had just changed. Just when the air in the studio seemed too thick to breathe, the host's earpiece buzzed. We've got a surprise guest calling in, she said, trying to hide the tension. Scott, it's your advisor, Ethan Caldwell. Scott straightened like a soldier hearing his general's name. Denzel just raised an eyebrow. Ethan's voice sliced through the feed like a knife. Let's set the record straight. Denzel, you're great at playing heroes on screen. But when it comes to economics, you're in over your head. You speak of justice, but your mansion's gates are as high as anyone's. Laughter broke from a few audience members, but it was nervous. Defensive. Denzel didn't blink. You want to talk about gates? Let's talk about the ones my mother couldn't walk through when she cleaned homes in Brentwood. Or the ones your donors build to keep out the very people they claim to help. Ethan snapped back. This isn't a movie, Denzel. We don't need monologues. We need numbers. Results. Oh, I've got numbers, Denzel said, leaning in. 70% of incarcerated youth come from low-income neighborhoods. 40% never make it past high school. And your hedge fund made $8 million off municipal budget cuts. That's your result. Scott muttered, enough, Denzel. But Denzel stood now, slowly, purposefully, ignoring the camera, the crowd, even the stage. I'm tired of being told passion is noise. That empathy is weak. That only data matters. Data doesn't bury kids, Scott. People do. Systems do. People like you, protect them. There was a pause. A long, painful pause. Then Ethan spoke one last time. You want to be the moral compass? Fine. But don't be surprised when the world doesn't follow you. I'm not here to be followed, Denzel said, his voice ice. I'm here to remind people they don't have to be led by liars. The studio erupted. Twitter exploded. TikTok clips went live mid-broadcast. Denzel's face, mid-sentence, was already viral. A movement didn't just start, it detonated. The studio lights shimmered against the polished desk, but they couldn't outshine what Denzel pulled from the inside of his jacket. A folded document. Thick paper. Bold letterhead. He laid it on the desk with purpose, staring directly into the lens. You want data, Scott? Denzel said, voice low but firm. Let's read some together. Scott blinked. What is that? It's a breakdown of your hedge fund's portfolio over the past 5 years, Denzel continued. Specifically, your bets against public education bonds. You got rich when schools went broke. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The host tried to intervene. Mr. Washington, we haven't verified. It's already verified, Denzel cut in. Signed off by your own CFO. I have a copy. And so do a dozen investigative journalists. They're publishing it as we speak. Scott's face flushed. That's a gross oversimplification. No, Denzel shot back. It's a grotesque truth. You stood behind podiums claiming to care about children, while making millions off their failures. Scott leaned forward, jaw tight. You think you can just storm into a conversation you barely understand, wave around papers, and label people villains? I don't need to label anyone, Denzel said. You wrote your label in ink. I'm just holding it up. The studio fell into a chilling silence. Even Ethan Caldwell, still patched into the broadcast, was quiet. Denzel looked toward the audience. This is what happens when power forgets its purpose. When profit trumps people. Scott exhaled, trying to regain control. You're not the voice of justice, Denzel. You're an actor, playing God with half the facts. Denzel's response was simple. And you're a banker, playing God with real lives. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stared, at Scott, at Denzel, at the truth laid bare under studio lights. And as phones lit up with headlines and hashtags, one thing became clear. This wasn't just television anymore. It was a reckoning. Within minutes of Denzel placing that document on the table, the outside world ignited. Clips flooded social media, Twitter, TikTok, even LinkedIn. Hashtag Denzel Drop trended worldwide. The phrase, "You wrote your label in ink," was quoted in headlines across every outlet. CNN cut into its regular broadcast. Fox News scrambled for a reaction from their economic analysts. Inside the studio, things were no calmer. Scott Bessent sat in stone-faced silence, scrolling his phone with fingers that trembled slightly. The producer whispered something into his earpiece, but he didn't respond. Denzel, the host finally said, "Are you accusing Mr. Bessent of financial exploitation of public systems?" "No," Denzel replied coolly, "I'm confirming it." The screen behind them flickered to a split screen. On the left, the document Denzel had exposed. On the right, a live feed of Representative Ayanna Pressley holding the same file in a press conference outside Capitol Hill. "This cannot go unanswered," she declared. "Congress will investigate hedge fund influence in education and public infrastructure." Back in the studio, the camera cut back to Denzel. "It's not just about one man," he said. "It's about an entire culture. A machine that monetizes misery and expects silence in return." He turned his chair slightly, toward the camera, toward America. To every student sitting in a moldy classroom, to every parent working 3 jobs and still falling short, to every teacher buying supplies out of pocket, know this: you are not the ones failing. You are being failed. The studio was dead quiet. And to those in suits who profit off that failure: I'm not coming for your bank accounts. I'm coming for your story. I'm going to rewrite it. Scott finally spoke. "You think words will undo the markets, Denzel?" "No," Denzel answered. "But they'll undo the lies." Phones rang across the building. Security repositioned. This was no longer a scheduled segment. It was a turning point. Scott Bessent stood up. Not in panic. Not in defeat. In defiance. He adjusted his cuffs slowly, as if preparing for a courtroom showdown. "You think you're some kind of messiah, Denzel," he said, voice sharp. "You made movies. I made billions. Guess who actually runs this country?" Denzel didn't flinch. He let the words settle like ash on a battlefield. "If money could buy justice, the world would be quiet," he replied. "But it isn't. It's screaming." A producer signaled the show had run over, yet no one moved to cut it. Millions were watching. This was no longer about ratings. This was reckoning. Scott pulled out a folder. Thick. Sealed. Marked confidential. "You're not the only one with receipts," he said. "This He held it up. Is your file. Every deal. Every quote. Every donation you've made. Read it, Denzel said calmly. Out loud. Scott paused. Go ahead. If there's a lie in there, I'll own it. If there's truth in it, I've already faced it. A hush blanketed the studio. For a moment, Scott seemed smaller. Not because he lacked power, but because he lacked courage. He set the file down. Didn't think so, Denzel said. You weaponize secrets. I weaponize truth. Suddenly, the studio lights dimmed slightly, then changed color. It wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. Behind Denzel, a new screen lit up with a phrase. Yellow square, this is not a performance. This is a beginning. A live counter appeared. Donations to a new public education initiative, inspired by Denzel's campaign, surged in real time. $90 million. $91.2 million. $92.5 million. The audience, both in studio and online, erupted. Scott sat down, but not in control. In silence. Denzel turned to the camera one last time. Truth isn't loud. It's consistent. And when it walks in the room, money loses its voice. Fade to black. If this conversation made you uncomfortable, good. Comfort is the enemy of progress. I didn't come here to play the hero or the villain, I came here to break the silence. We can't keep letting wealth rewrite truth and call it success. If this hit you hard, imagine living it daily. Now's the time to rise, not for me, but for every voice that's been ignored because it couldn't buy a seat at the table. Truth always outlives the empire.